Some stunning new reporting and a new examination of the current polls reveal Trump is struggling mightily with a segment of the electorate that has been staunchly on his side. They've elected him twice. But now they're growing angrier and angrier with the state of the economy following the launching of the war with Iran. New York Times reports this, quote, blue-collar white voters are, for the first time, seriously doubting Trump's handling of the economy. A review of polling by the New York Times shows an extraordinary swing on that issue among white voters without college degrees between his first midterm election and now. Then, working-class white voters approved of his management of the economy by margins of 30 percentage points or more. Now, recent polls show them disapproving by anywhere from 14 points to more than 30 points. Reuters is reporting similar findings in their most recent survey. Trump's approval among rural Americans has dropped 10 points since he took office, now at 50% from 60% in February of 2025. We're back with Tom and Claire. Claire, I thought of you when I read this piece in the Times. It's just such a dramatic swing. It's not that these are the people who dislike him the most. That group is Democrats. It's the group that makes up the largest number of Americans and that has swung the most dramatically. What does that predict for the midterms?
Well, it's huge because here's the thing. I think it's sometimes easy for us to forget that margins matter. I think we look at places that are blue and red, and then we hear about swing purple places. And what people don't realize is the way you flip a seat, whether it's a Senate seat or a congressional seat, is that you don't lose by as much in places that are not friendly to you. You lose by less. Right. And that happens two ways. One way is you have people who decide to vote against who they voted for before. But many times it's because people stay home and other people show up. So what's really happening here with this swing and this approval rating is you're not doing anything to the passion that the Democratic Party feels about taking over and getting some guardrails in place and stopping this insanity. But you are losing enthusiasm from the people in particularly rural America that are really hurting right now. And by the way, they have a hard time relating to the people at Mar-a-Lago and the billionaires that he hangs out with. And by the way, they are really struggling with a farm economy that Trump has decimated with his needless war and his tariffs. And their health care is really in trouble. Many of them were getting some of the subsidies to get health care they could afford through Obamacare, and they've lost those. And they're losing their hospitals, and they're losing the ability to see a doctor without having to drive a long distance and paying a lot more for gas in their tank. So those things are going to make a big difference. And I don't think them putting out press releases about how taxes on tips are better is going to do it for them.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, there's a piece that to cover Trump for 10 years, you have to do, right? You have to look at what he showed his coalition. And what he showed his coalition throughout his first term as president and throughout his 4 years, most of his 4 years in exile, was, I thought it was BS, but it's what he projected, was Trump sort of holding court. It sounded like a lot of nonsense to me, but he was in conversation with his coalition. He is now in conversation with billionaires. He is now only talking to people who think the country is, quote, so hot right now. The only people who think the country is hot right now are billionaires and millionaires and the kinds of people you run into in Palm Beach. He is not in conversation with any of his own coalition that is feeling the pain of his economy or the military families. 13 people died in the war in Iran. So just talk about how completely willfully out of step he is with his own political coalition.
You know, for years, I think we all wondered, what is it going to take to break through? What is it going to take for a lot of the people who support him to finally just get it that he doesn't care about them? You know, years ago when Howard Stern, you know, kind of an alternative voice, you know, in politics would say, he hates you. You know, and people would kind of roll their eyes, and it just wouldn't come. Yeah. Right? It was a big deal when Howard Stern said that, but people just didn't believe it. Well, it seems to me that it took three things. First, he's a tired old man. He doesn't go out on the road. He doesn't have these rallies anymore. He doesn't have it in him. It's not there. I suspect that, people out there don't really want to go to those anymore because that part's over. He got reelected. He's back in the White House. They all proved that it could be done. The second part, though, is that he has ruined the economy in ways that are directly traceable to him, which is very unusual. Most presidents get battered by big tectonic shifts in the economy. It's pretty rare where you have two decisions in particular, tariffs and a war, where the president says, I'm going to do this, and then prices go up over here. He did it. He did it to himself, and in a way that the average person can really grasp and understand. And the third part of that is he did all this while redecorating the White House like it's Versailles or like a cheap, Dollar Tree version of Versailles. He did it while throwing himself these ugly, garish parties like the one we saw last night. So you've got all three of these things coming together. He doesn't want to talk to his base anymore. He is costing them money and hurting their standard of living in a way they directly understand. And he's doing it while he's throwing big, stupid, ugly parties for himself. And I think finally there are people out there, finally, thank God, going, this guy just doesn't care. And I'm suffering because of this very rich man entertaining his very rich friends and doing a lot of stupid things. And I think that it's finally breaking through to people.
Claire, this Time story really sort of plugs all of the data and all the polls into the analysis, I think, that Tom just gave perfectly. This is some sort of prediction of how it could impact 2028. From the New York Times. Even a more muted turnout from blue-collar white voters who voted more than 2-1 for Trump in 2024 could imperil his party's chances in November. It is critical, that's John McLaughlin, a Trump pollster, instead of mobilizing the white working class. If they don't, we lose the House and the Senate. The fourth point about Trump in this term is he's incapable of taking in information. All of his time on Twitter and all of his time watching the news, and he seemed to read at least the Washington Post last time, he seemed to have a better sense of what was going on. I mean, when he says the country is hot right now, he seems to believe that is the case, that his supporters think the country's hot. His supporters don't. I mean, these are the numbers. This is his pollster. What do you make of where we are, not just ahead of the midterms, but ahead of the next presidential?
Yeah, I think what Tom said is right. I think he's exposing that really the part of the job he likes is the part that's about him. He's not really interested in public policy. I mean, I remember when Republicans would come back from the White House after meeting with him about health care, and they would just shake their heads and say, he is clueless about this issue. He's clueless about the details. It's such a contrast to most presidents who had some intellectual curiosity about public policy. This guy has none. He wants to go places and ignore the fact that he's getting booed at sporting events. He wants to, have parties that celebrate him. He wants to build stuff with his name on it, or big stuff that is garish that has his name in it, or he wants things to be called by his name. This is all he's really interested in. That's the only fun part of the job to him. The rest of it, he is bored with it. He was bored with what's going on with this war he started. And I think that folks out there are beginning to get it. And by the way, the ugly party last night, he thought that was going to get him well with white blue-collar workers. He actually believed that having our military salute men who are going to go out and beat somebody who's down on a mat, beat him senseless, he actually thought that having our military salute those guys was going to get him well with people who can't afford to fill their pickup truck. And it won't. It won't. And by the way, anybody who saw any of it that was not a strong Trump supporter was turned off by all of it. I mean, he didn't help himself last night. He hurt himself last night. He doesn't get that part because he's so wrapped up in, aren't I cool? Isn't this cool? I can do this. I can make the White House look like this. I can have the planes fly over. And it is so childish. And it's so bad for our country. I hope our country never makes a mistake like this again, electing a guy that's this shallow and vapid to the Oval Office.